The following is a GoPowercat.com production.
With the ever-changing landscape of college realignment, the ACC looks like it may be the next conference to fall. Florida State is at the forefront of that, but if you think it's just Florida State out in front of this by themselves, you'd be kidding yourselves. We're going to break all that down and more today. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another edition, Big 12 Insiders. This is Big B, Brien Hanley, along with Tim Fitzgerald with GoPowercat. Fitz, what's going on today, my guy?
Nothing. We usually do this on Friday.
Correct.
Yeah, you got a great guest tomorrow. I mean, he's not on the 24/7 network, but people know who he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It'll be fun tomorrow with Michael Swain. So we'll get that taken care of. But today we are talking ACC and realignment on, is it going to happen? Is the ACC going to be the next conference that goes by the wayside like the Pac-12 did? And if it does, where does that leave the Big 12? Is the Big 12 going to scoop up as many teams as possible? Are they going to be strategic? What's it going to look like from the outside looking in? So we'll break all that down. Again, I want to remind everybody, Tuesday through Friday, the Big 12 Insiders on YouTube. Please go subscribe, like, make comments. More importantly, hit the notification bell so you are reminded when it comes on. Even if you don't catch it live, make sure you come back and check it out later. We're starting to grow. We are really starting to grow. I want to make sure everybody understands this is a Big 12 show, and we cover all things Big 12. So having said that, Fitz, let's break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, Florida State is obviously the team that's out in front of this. They are wanting out, made it known that they wanted out. The other teams are quietly behind the scenes saying the same thing, but Florida State is the one out in front. And kind of like I mentioned in the intro, there's no way that Florida State is going at this alone. They are getting the help of all these other teams, North Carolina, Clemson, Miami, Virginia Tech, Virginia, all these other schools, no doubt, are behind the scenes, sending their lawyers, giving the help, maybe even other resources, all the resources that they need for Florida State to be able, to get out of this grant of rights so that they can leave and go to other conferences. I believe 100% that that's happening.
I agree. And what strikes me about where we're at with this situation, this storyline, is not long ago, the general theme of all of this was the grant of rights is ironclad. They can't get out of it.
Right.
And now it seems pretty accepted that the price to get out, if there is a price, is acceptable. And it will happen. And the narrative is flipped maybe in the last 3 months from ain't going to happen to it's going to happen. It's just when.
Yes.
But I don't think that necessarily means it's going to happen. But I think the ACC, like the Pac-12, has put themselves in a corner that they cannot escape. And it's going to lead to many of their top institutions leaving. The good news for the ACC, in a small picture kind of way, is unlike the Pac, there's other schools around from which they can reconvene a conference of some sort.
Right.
It won't be a power conference, I don't think, particularly if, 10 of the 15 existing members or 12 end up in one of the other three conferences. It's going to be a completely rebuilt and version of the American. These teams might just join the American at that point, but it's moving quickly, man. It's gone from ain't going to happen to Florida State is gone, and who will follow.
Correct. The thing for me is it's just what you said. It happened so quickly with the Pac-12. We thought the Pac-12, okay, they're going to be around. They'll just make some changes here or there. And then poof, they are gone. Yep. This, I think, is the same way. The difference is it's not going to catch everybody by surprise. Where in the Pac-12, it caught everybody by surprise. This one, it's a little bit more out in front. Everybody kind of, okay, This is what's happening. We've seen this before. This is going to go downhill. To me, it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it would almost seem like the ESPN side of this is wanting this to go away, because very clearly, if ESPN wanted the ACC to be around, they could just renegotiate that contract and pay these schools more money if they wanted to. But ESPN has absolutely no regard, or they just don't want to do that. So if they don't have to do that, they're not going to, and this is kind of the result.
The calculation for ESPN would be this. If the SEC and Big 12 both take 4 schools, the SEC entirely belongs to ESPN, so now they have to pay those schools. And half of the Big 12 belongs to ESPN, with the other half Fox. Is that calculation, that having those schools in the higher paid conferences saving them money as opposed to having the ACC? And what do they do with the ACC network? Do they just fold that, or they move it to the Big 12? It becomes very interesting. It's all a money calculation to ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about any of these conferences.
No.
They only care about the SEC, to be honest, because they've gone full in on them, and they've made that pretty much the ESPN Southern Conference. So I do find it interesting that this is accelerating. So obviously ESPN sees benefit to not having the ACC around. Believe me, I know what they're going through. Again, the Big 12 went through this not too long ago and survived.
Yes.
The Pac-12 ran headlong into it and didn't survive. And it all comes down to conference leadership. And we're seeing conference leadership in the ACC be even more less united than the Pac. The Pac had a great public persona. Mm-hmm. We knew what was going on behind the scenes.
Right.
There's no behind the scenes necessarily, other than some of those schools that are going to jump as soon as Florida State does, who might be saying, no, we want to stay in the ACC. But there's no public perception that the ACC is united and staying together. No. It's going to lose some schools, and everyone knows it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So for the Big 12, just looking at it from that perspective, and we've talked about it before, but I don't think there's any harm in kind of repeating and going over some of this stuff again. And again, what makes sense? So does the Big 12 try to go after big fish? And obviously the biggest fish, which I know from the outside looking in, people are thinking North Carolina is the biggest fish.
It is.
Yeah, it is the biggest fish. I know you think that football runs everything, and technically it does, but North Carolina is not one of those football schools, and it isn't. But when it comes to being the biggest fish, it's North Carolina. They just are. They have that kind of pull. Is there any reasoning behind that, Fitz? Is there anything that you can think of, or maybe that to kind of tell people, hey, why is North Carolina the big fish out of the ACC?
Yeah, it's crazy. They can pick their conference. They've got that AAU status the Big Ten covets. And they're a fresh state to both the Big Ten and SEC. They can pick which one of those they want. But the other side of it, the Brett Yormark version of this is him. He's fearless. He's going to go in and pitch. Look, you are a brand. You are a big player, and you will be lost in the Big Ten and SEC. You're just going to be another school. In fact, you're going to be that outsider who joined an established conference, even though new teams are coming in. It's still a core that has been there a very long time. He can sell that the Big 12 was a fresh start. This will be an entirely new conference starting next year in so many ways. And if you come in, if North Carolina and North Carolina State and Florida State and Miami, Clemson, Virginia Tech, if 4 of those schools say, yeah, we're gonna go over there. We might not make as much money on the front end of this, but we have an argument that we now sit at the same table as the Big Ten and SEC in future value, and for the playoff, we should have the same number of playoff spots. So it becomes very interesting how hard Brett Yormark can sell this. I don't think it'll work, but he certainly will attempt to do so.
Yeah, he definitely will jump in, try to get something like that done. But again, I think that's the good approach. Start high, and again, don't leave anybody else, because you don't want to skip over, pennies to pick up $1. That would be the thing not to do here. But at the same time, set the bar high. Don't leave any stone unturned, because you never know. maybe they will. Again, the chances are maybe 10% at the most that they would jump to the Big 12. But you know what? I've always heard this saying, you don't know unless you ask. And all they can do is
Yeah.
tell you no.
Yeah, that's
So,
exactly right, Brian. I mean,
yeah,
exactly right. Go pitch your pitch, and maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll stick. Maybe the importance of being a major player within the conference in terms of having a full voice. Look,
right.
if you think Oklahoma is going to go into the SEC with a full voice, they're not. I mean, they
No,
might have an equal vote, but uh, just ask A&M. They haven't had a full voice. They were promised things that were tossed aside because they found a shinier object. If you're North Carolina or Florida State or whomever, you're not going to be the shiniest object. You just won't.
no.
Texas might be in the SEC. Notice I left them out of that equation. And now you can just honestly say, look, Clemson, North Carolina, and whomever else, you are a shiny object. You'll be important, and you will be in some really good, desirable time slots for our network providers because we have both ESPN and Fox. It kind of
Right.
splits the difference. You get multiple platforms here, and the Big Ten has CBS and NBC in lesser formats, but it just becomes very interesting to see how he'll try to sell this. But the good news is that there's some quality teams. This is the most ironic thing about the ACC's collapse and the fact that they're having problems getting their media rights to a level in which they can survive. Is they got some schools that bring something to the table.
Right.
Even after the Big Ten and SEC takes their picks, there's still going to be 2 to 4 really viable schools that will assist the Big 12 in growing.
Right. I'm going to bring this up on the screen for people that are watching here, Fitz. So just looking at these schools that are in the ACC. Now, we've got Notre Dame up there because outside of football, they are in the ACC. So right now we're talking necessarily about football. So forgive us on that. But so all these other schools there and what they bring and their brands and where they're currently at, I like that we have this up on the screen for people to actually take a look at and think, okay, what makes the most sense? For where schools currently are in the Big 12, what makes the most sense there? Well, the first thing that people think of, okay, West Virginia, Cincinnati, those schools right there. I mean, there's West Virginia, Cincinnati's right there in Ohio. Well, you see Louisville there, and you see Virginia Tech there in Virginia, and maybe Pitt. To me, and even me growing up in Louisville, I'm not sure those are the schools right off the bat. Now, maybe Virginia, but I'm not sure right off the bat those would be the ones that I would say, okay, we got to run out there and go get Fitz.
Right. Let me address the Notre Dame thing. We're now seeing rumors, a lot of talk that Notre Dame is strongly considering finally making the move to the Big Ten.
Right.
So you come to this when they added 2 more schools at the end of the Pac-12 collapse in Oregon and Washington. It got them to 18. What's the number you're seeking? I know they're going to save a spot for Notre Dame. They're not going to go to 24 without them. But do they just say, okay, this round we're going to go Notre Dame and Florida State, North Carolina? I don't know. But if Notre Dame's in play for football, that becomes the number 1 pick. That becomes Patrick Mahomes overnight.
Yes.
How this impacts the Big 12 in terms of Notre Dame is, while there's probably no chance in where that they're going to end up in the Big 12, Brett Yormark, he'll make the pitch. If they don't want to, I mean, I'm sure all of their sports would join in the Big 10, but what if they stay independent? If they stay independent and the ACC collapses, where does basketball go? And then you start talking about the Big 12 play into basketball, Olympic sports. And does that become now at the front of Brett Yormark's to-do list? So it's interesting. I think the conferences will comfortably go to 20. I think 16 is the right number, but the Big Ten's already blown by it. So if that's true, we're looking at probably 6 schools between SEC and I might as well call them by their networks and the Big Ten. And that leaves a lot of really good schools for the Big 12 to pick from. It's very intriguing.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, and on the other side of the break, Fitz, we will bring up the map again and kind of start talking about what schools make the most sense and talk about the basketball side of this. I know we dived into it a little bit, but we were mostly talking football. We'll dive into the basketball side of this and how this might make sense once we hear a word from Synergy Financial Partners.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders again. This is Brien Hanley with our guy, Tim Fitzgerald. So, Fitz, we talked a little bit and mostly about football and where the ACC would land if it collapsed and where schools. I'm going to bring back up the map here, and let's talk about the basketball side of this and what makes sense. Look, Brett Yormark has made a lot of statements, and he's made no mistake about it and hasn't apologized. Look, the Big 12 has the best conference, and he wants to go out there and say, hey, we've got the best basketball conference in the country. Join us. And that's the pitch. And getting this basketball network, I think, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think he's got to get that done sooner than later, maybe right after the basketball season. Who knows? Maybe he's behind the scenes trying to get this thing done right now, and as soon as the tournament's over, he's going to announce that we've got a big TV deal, for the Big 12 conference, because he knows that the ACC is on the downslide. I think that's something that has to get done before the ACC slides. And if we're looking at these schools here, who makes the most sense to you if we have that deal in place? I know this is hypothetical, but say we have the basketball deal in place. Who do you think might come or would be the best fit for the Big 12?
This is actually, Brien, the big question. Which way does Brett Yormark want to do? Because there's two different shopping lists. If you want to eat healthy and stick with the traditional look of things, you focus on Clemson and Virginia Tech and maybe Pitt, for their football programs. Miami might be in play because there's a strange thing right now where schools or the conferences don't know if they really want Miami.
Right.
Or do you really lean into basketball and you go to North Carolina? Alan over in the comments mentions that, there's a lot of talk in North Carolina that NC and NC State are connected at the hip and one's not going with the other. Now, we've seen through the process of conference realignment around the country, that's not necessarily true at this end of the day. But if it is, you can go to North Carolina and say, I'll tell you what, we will take North Carolina State, and Duke and put you in, kind of scheduling with UCF.
Yep.
And we'll also take Louisville and then put them in scheduling with the, Cincinnati and West Virginia and maybe Iowa State. And you're there. Football and basketball are at odds in the selection process, the draft process, if you want to say it that way, of what the Big 12 might want. And the basketball play might be a leverage for a North Carolina and a Duke to say, look, we may not see eye to eye with maybe the academics or the standing of the Big 12, but we want our basketball to flourish at the highest level, and that's the play.
That's kind of what I think. Look, NC State. It's not that I'm out on NC State. It's not that I wouldn't want NC State, but as we just saw, Texas and OU left for the SEC, and everybody thought that OU and Oklahoma State were attached at the hip. Well, that wasn't true. I mean, it wasn't even remotely true. They hightailed it as soon as they could, and they hitched their wagon to somebody that they thought was their equal. And OU, as we all know, they never consider Oklahoma State as their equal, and they left. Same thing was out with Oregon and Washington. I mean, it's not the same. Everybody, they're out for themselves, and they'll attach themselves to who they find to be their equal. And if you talk to people out there, North Carolina does not consider NC State to be their equal. They consider Duke to be their equal as far as a national brand is concerned, and that brand would be basketball.
Right.
So do they want to keep those two together, or do they both want to stay together? I think they would, because I think those two playing each other twice a year is big business for both of those universities. To get away from that, I think, for me, a lot of people say it's the biggest rivalry in the country. Okay, if it is, do you want to get away from that?
Yeah.
Or do you want to keep that in place? I think it's something that has to be considered because, I mean, yeah, money is one thing, but how much would they lose over time? When you're talking about that, would they lose, especially Duke? Because North Carolina, like you said, they can pick where they want to go. Duke cannot. That's the thing. Duke cannot. So it almost would be Duke trying to convince North Carolina that this is the best thing for you.
I agree. We haven't even gotten into the academic layer of this.
Right.
Look, Duke's not getting an invite from the SEC. There's no world in which that occurs. They are an ACC academics, or excuse me, AAU academic school, which brings up the possibility maybe they can pitch the Big Ten. There's other schools like that in the Big Ten that don't bring a whole lot of football value, hasn't seemed to impact them at all.
Nope.
So it just is very interesting to see how these schools will scramble around. What we know at the end of the day, when everyone's beginning to pick sides, which is literally this, we're like in on the ball field when we're kids, and the ACC just showed up, and now everyone's going to pick who they want.
Right.
You don't want to be standing there too long.
No.
You want to be picked, and I'm not sure Duke's going to get picked because athletics and academics are beginning to separate a little bit more within the conference realignment discussion, but not really for the Big Ten. So maybe they lean into Duke because of academics. But I know this, I don't see them adding any school that is not of AAU status. I just don't. It's not necessarily a rule for them. I mean, they still have Nebraska in that lost theirs, but they sure do feel good about themselves because it's the chancellors and presidents who make these decisions, and they love that academic twist. And Brien, we haven't even got into research money, which is so important to the Big Ten ego as an academic alignment. So it gets very confusing. I know this. If the Big 12 ends up with NC State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and maybe Virginia Tech, they're the ones that are kind of sliding down the draft chart, so to speak. The Big 12 will be better for that. Mm-hmm. They will. It'll help them. It'll kind of pull all these pieces together. But there's a good chance that, maybe in North Carolina would listen to the basketball pitch. Maybe Clemson gets passed up because South Carolina absolutely doesn't want them in the SEC, and they don't have AAU status. They're not going to the Big Ten. So there's so many, it's almost impossible to predict where this is going to end up. And that's what makes this so intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw a couple of schools get taken by the ACC that came out of the Pac-12 with Stanford and Cal.
Yep.
Great academic schools, both on the outside looking in when it comes to athletics. Although both of them have outstanding, really good Olympic sports.
Right.
But football and basketball, which are the big money makers, not so much. Do they have a place at all in the Big 12? I'm guessing not, because Big 12 had an opportunity to get them and passed. So I'm guessing they don't have a place.
Well, they made it clear they didn't want to be in the conference with a bunch of lowlifes, academic lowlifes in the Big 12. They made that clear. And SMU now, they view Duke and those schools on, Wake. Look, again, I think this is the lesson. Academic snobbery is going to get you killed in this day and age, and from an athletic standpoint. There's no interest from this conference to go west again, at least right now. Maybe at 24 if it comes to that, but I don't think those schools are of any interest to the Big 12. They just they're different purposes. They serve a different class of athlete. I don't exactly know how to say it. They're very elite in everything they do, and I think I don't want to be in a country club. I want to be in an athletic conference. SMU is just off the table. They have really put themselves in a bad position. But does the ACC reform then with the three schools that might get left behind, those three schools, and start grabbing a UCF, which is a great academic school, Tulane, great academic school. You can start looking around and find some pretty good academic schools. UConn now become the ACC team. Does UConn move into the list for Eastern expansion for the Big 12 above ACC teams because of basketball.
Right.
So I think the ACC can reform in a lesser standard. But keep in mind what set this all in motion was the ACC of the now Power Four is the lowest compensated per school. It's that way now, and it's going to get worse in a year when the Big 12's new contract hits. The per school payout is higher in the Big 12, and it's going to escalate even more. If they can bring in some of these schools, maybe that means it'll escalate for that next negotiation even higher, much higher. We'll see.
So here's the question, and this is kind of the $1 million question. Does the ACC just fold this summer, Fitz? Is it over? And I mean, these hypotheticals that we're talking about, do they come to fruition and everybody has to start digging in and getting in where they fit in? Or are we just making a big to-do about nothing? The ACC has that stronghold on the grant of rights, and they're not going to be able to get out of it.
That's their rope they're hanging on to. They thought they had a firm grip on it, and there was no pullback, and now we're seeing enough pullback. The question becomes this: the ACC is a nonprofit in North Carolina, where the state laws state that a majority of shareholders, partners, can vote that nonprofit out of existence. If Notre Dame has a full vote, it's interesting. I don't know why they would have a full vote for things that impact football, but it appears they do, which is weird. But if you can get 8 schools that say, yeah, you know what, we're going to move on. Look, and we're talking about 10 that might have landing spots for sure amongst these 3 conferences. They might vote the ACC right out of existence. But I think the ACC will reconstitute in some form, picking up some of those American schools along the Eastern Seaboard, and also maybe because of Cal and Stanford, look a little bit more west and consider some other schools. But again, we come back to Cal and Stanford looking down their snoots at everyone and wondering, well, San Diego State and this other school, Fresno State, aren't on our academic island, and we don't want to be hanging out with them. And so now the ACC's adopted a big problem that put the Pac-12 in peril. Cal and Stanford think nobody's worthy of their company that isn't already in the club.
It's a problem. It's definitely a problem. Just in my opinion, I don't want the ACC to go away. That's my first thing. I don't want it to go away. Just as a college athletics fan, I want the ACC to be around. And the reason that I say that is because it's going to end up giving way too much power to the Big Ten and the SEC, more than what they already have. And then we would be on a collision course to what we don't want is 2 big super conferences making their own thing. And that is what I don't want. I want the ACC to be around. You mentioned it earlier about ESPN. All they care about is money. Clearly they do. It's a business. It is what it is. And they have done the research on whether it's going to cost them more money to keep the ACC and the Big 12 around, or more importantly, the ACC around, than it is for them to break up and for them to grab more schools. I guess we'll find out here pretty quickly on what the ESPN wants to do, because like we mentioned, all this can go away, Fitz, if they just renegotiated those grants. Right. I mean, it literally goes away in an instant if they just renegotiate it. So we'll find out how serious ESPN really wants the ACC to be around, because if it gets to, the 11th hour and there's no renegotiation, we'll know that, number one, I think everybody already knows that ESPN is in the pocket of the SEC. That would be number one. And number two, that they're just, hey, this is what we're looking out for. Sorry, ACC, you were around, but you know what? Times change and we got to change with them. Sorry, but you no longer exist.
Yeah. There's so many calculations. If the ACC says, hey, we'll stay together if you pay us more money, ESPN is going to pull out the calculator and say, that didn't work for us. We're going to let you break up.
Exactly.
I mean, they're kind of in a horrible position. And our friend Scott brings this up in the chat. Look, if you're the Big 12, you only want so many dominoes to fall. Yes. Because if the Big 10 and ACC or SEC decide 24, And then the whole Big 12 is back on the shopping list for those conferences.
And they will be.
And again, I think is that going to be good for college athletics? And who would those conferences try to add out of this conference? It becomes interesting, particularly from a Kansas State perspective, which, I cover Kansas State. The Big Ten's not going to be interested because of academics, but they do probably want Kansas in that hyper expansion scenario. So do they say, we'll take K-State too, which is kind of a sad way to get into the conference, but it counts the same. It's
Right.
kind of like an overtime win over West Virginia. It still counted. And does the SEC go, well, we're certainly taking Oklahoma State and we're going to take, TCU or what? I don't know. Does Kansas State work into the SEC? I think it might. I mean, the football importance at K-State might actually get them in. I don't know that that's great for Kansas State athletics overall, but that's just one thing that could play out. This is like a brush fire. We thought it was tamped down out west, and now it's popped up out east. And does it spread to the Midwest and overcome what is the Big 12? And looks like a very viable Big 12 if it can add the right pieces and become even stronger from another conference collapsing. This one is the most fascinating thing that's happened in conference realignment because of all the different moving parts we discussed and all the different elements that will go into the decision of the conferences to decide this is a school we want. No, we're going to pass. It's fascinating to me, Brien.
Yes, it is. We're going to take one final break here, and then we'll have some final words on kind of what we think is going to happen, what we want to happen. Fascination. Is football more important for the Big 12? Is basketball more important? We'll be right back after another word from our partners with Synergy Financial Partners.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right. Again, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Brien Hanley with Tim Fitzgerald. Look, Fitz, the final word here, the Big 12, I think, and I know we've said it on several occasions, or at least I know I've said it, I think they have to start leaning into basketball more. It's not that football isn't important. Football is absolutely the driver of all of this. But if you can separate yourself and create something that these other conferences don't have, which is the best basketball league in the country, if you can do that, which they've already done, and just lean into that, I think that's the way to survive. I really do, especially with the new basketball contract that's being talked about. That's a way to survive. Now, if they try and say, you know what, we try to keep up with the big boys in football, I just have a feeling, Fitz, that it's going to fail, and that's going to be miserable, and that's going to be bad news for the Big 12.
It's something we've discussed on the show before. You can't become a blue blood. You can become a brand, but Clemson's a perfect example of how to build a brand in this modern era and kind of get to sit at the table with the blue blood, so to speak, the Ohio States and Michigans and Alabama and Georgia, and you can go on. Texas is a huge brand. But can you build up enough brands that make you kind of appear to be more blue blood like? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible for the Big 12 unless they pull off the coup and get Florida State and Clemson and Virginia Tech and, really load up on those. I don't see that happening, but it's certainly something they're going to try to do. But you're right. If you're Brett Yormark and you're looking at this from a financial perspective, you see basketball as the area for which the most growth exists. And, you're adding Arizona. We've already seen the impact of Houston coming in and being a huge disruption to how the conference has operated for years. You bring in Arizona in next year. If you do bring in a Duke, if you do bring in a UConn, if you have that basketball, let's say it's a non-football expansion, and you do bring in a Villanova and a Gonzaga and some of these other schools, you can build a basketball product that is so valuable they cannot leave you out of everything else.
Correct.
They need those schools to have the NCAA tournament work properly. So I'm glad it's Brett Yormark making this decision for the Big 12, because it had been any of the other commissioners to come before him, this conference would be folded up and done before the ACC's even, loses a team. So I'm glad it's him, and I trust that he knows what he's doing. He's not going off the seat of his pants. He's hired some really good consultants that he's built up from the professional ranks, and he has incredible contacts. It's entirely possible if Turner loses a big part of the NBA, if not all, they would love to have the Big 12 to replace it. And now you're talking money that just hasn't been seen, because what ESPN and Fox have trained us to believe basketball doesn't have value, while the NCAA tournament is the most valuable product in college sports, probably. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. They have proof that basketball has a lot of value, and yet they sit there and say basketball is like 1/10 of this contract, which we know is a lie. Right. They are stealing basketball from the Big 12.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the time today, Fitz. Thank you for joining us, and thank everybody for joining us and catching us again Tuesday through Friday, 1 p.m. Central Time. Big 12 Insiders. We are live here on YouTube. Come check us out either live, check us out afterwards. We appreciate everybody. We will see you tomorrow.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.